But
I was.
No,
Okay.
I'll find it eventually. Fuck or pose.
Okay, like, yeah, like in a word. Okay, it's like, that was just something, okay,
Hey.
okay. Yeah. Is that, I'm trying to.
Have to like.
Yeah. It should. Put it on
Yeah.
there, so that's nothing.
Was that there? Sorry. I don't know. Yeah. I was very drunk when I went to so and this play's not on now, but soon. Or whenever you. Oh, and then
Hey, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome, how we doing? Almost there, 1.5-ish more weeks. It's all right, we're gonna get energized. Welcome to the Laurie Okuma Memorial Reading. My name is Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the QC Hyde Living Writers series. And this is the penultimate event of our semester. And we're excited to welcome an amazing author who also happens to be a San Diego native. I know, yeah. But before I introduce her officially, I'd like to thank those who have helped to make this series and this event possible. And that includes all of our friends at Love Library, my trusty co-host, Miracle Tumlin, along with Danya Mukahal, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I also want to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature and the MFA program in creative writing for their continued support of the series, as well as Michael Ramirez and our friends who are selling books over there in the corner. And I'm also humbled to acknowledge the space that we are privileged to share this evening. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations. And as part of the SDSU community, we acknowledge this legacy. And tonight, I'd like to issue a very, very special thanks to the Okuma family for the endowment that allows us to honor the memory of a beloved SDSU MFA alumna, Laurie Matsueda Okuma, by featuring the work of a woman prose or poet. In addition to earning her MFA, Laurie also taught at SDSU and was committed to bringing attention to women writers whose voices are often silenced. We were excited to announce last spring that Laurie's manuscript, The Whisper of Distant Waves, had been entered into special collections and at the University Archives here in Love Library, and is now housed alongside many other impactful voices, including those from several of the guests that we've hosted over the years as part of the Memorial Series. So this just gives us another reason to celebrate her legacy tonight, along with her family's continued support. Just a few reminders, if you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones. Thank you. And know that this event is being recorded, but don't worry, all we see is this space right here. It is now my pleasure to introduce our featured author. Janie Kim is the author of We Carry the Sea in Our Hands, from which she'll share tonight. Applauded as beautifully composed and original by New York Times-bestselling author Joyce Carol Oates, the debut novel employs poetic prose and an imaginative voice to explore family, trauma, and belonging through one woman's journey to reconnect with her roots. Janie is the daughter of South Korean immigrants. She grew up, as I mentioned, in San Diego and studied molecular biology at Princeton University. She is currently a biology PhD student at Stanford and is studying RNA and the symbiosis between fischeri, I don't know if I pronounced that right, a bioluminescent bacterium, and the bobtail squid, a very charismatic little creature. She likes ocean critters that are fun-sized, or better yet, microscopic, funner-sized. As an undergraduate, she worked with bacteria that live inside algae and make toxins to deter hungry sea slugs. During her Fulbright research grant to Denmark, she spent time with some tag team marine bacteria and microalgae. She writes about these and other topics in microbiology for Small Things Considered. It's very rare in an author's intro that you would hear me say terms like RNA and bioluminescent bacterium. But this is what makes Kim's work so insightful and illuminating. its artful ability to conflate the worlds of literature and science and forge new paths of connectivity and understanding. As the poet Jane Hirschfield asserts, a work of art is not a piece of fruit lifted from a tree branch. It is a ripening collaboration of artist, receiver, and world. We carry the sea in our hands, invites the collaboration of biological phenomenon and personal experiment to remind us that amid and despite the chaos, life always finds a way. So for this heartening, powerful prose, and for making science less scary to us English majors, we are honored to have Janie Kim here with us tonight. So please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Much for the lovely, generous intro. Thank you everyone for being here and for giving up your Wednesday evenings. This is such an honor. If I'm being honest, I think maybe I would say I feel weird and then I feel honored, given that I am a PhD student, as you mentioned, and it's usually me sitting in the audience and someone else big and fancy standing here. But it is what it is. So I thought if you aren't already scienced out from having read the book, for those of you who have read the book, I would show some of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
It doesn't come out, it just bends. Should be.
That's okay.
You wanna bring it back up?
Cool. So I think most people have heard of bacteria in the context of infections. You've also probably heard of bacteria in the context of the human gut microbiome, which has been sort of a buzzword. People are claiming that it does everything, some of which it does, some of which it's yet to be found. So there are lots of interesting bacteria. There's bioluminescent bacteria, like you mentioned. There are other bacteria that form these colonies that emit these almost pearl-like orbs of, there's actually an antibiotic that's inside of them that has this blue color. There are other bacteria that form, these are called biofilms. There are lots of bacterial cells in this image, and they form these very complicated structures that have advantageous properties in different contexts. There's another particular species of bacteria called Bacillus subtilis that forms what are called Van Gogh bundles. And so these are bacteria that, in order to reach a food source that is across a solid surface, they will cooperate between a bunch of different cells and form these bundles that will allow them to move more efficiently. And then this is something that showed up this is my bottle of media that is not supposed to have this contaminant. I found it a few weeks back, and it's very charismatic. I don't know what it is. I hope to find out, but just a picture of maybe in the lab. Where did this like go? This is out of order. I'm sorry. This is another, just like science, just winging it. I thought I would give a little bit of background. So I am a microbiologist. I also do work involving squid, hence the squid hat. If I can get this to animate. So these are baby bobtail squids. The adults are like this big. They're native to Hawaii, Japan, and Australia. Hence why I keep telling my advisors that I need to go do field work. The babies they're like the size of a grain of barley. This is them when I was trying to colonize them with their symbiotic glow-in-the-dark bacteria, and we just put them in shot glasses. I also write for a microbiology blog called Small Things Considered. If anyone in here has any interest in microbiology or science writing or just trying something completely different, please reach out. We love having guest writers. I also enjoy making art just for fun. That could be with traditional media like colored pencils, digital paint. I can also be with living bacteria. So in undergrad, I had a very, very generous advisor who was okay with me doing things in the lab, like trying to paint with bacteria and growth media. So this is actually entirely made of different species of bacteria. The plate itself does not have any blue color, and the bacteria actually secretes this enzyme that will convert something in the plate to make this blue color. And then I had yellow bacteria, so you can mix the yellow and the blue to make the greens. These are all the pretty bacteria. I also do sculpture. I have been told that aspects of the sort of art tinkering I do and the writing I do and the science I do have something in common. Yeah. And then I think maybe it would be interesting to give people an overview of the science I do. I'm curious what parallels there are in the science that I now do as a PhD student and the science that is in my book, which I wrote before starting my PhD. So as I mentioned before, bacteria are very important both in health and disease for many organisms. So things like worms, flies, us, lagoons, squids. You might have heard of the gut microbiome. People have been calling it like an acquired organ on the news, and I think that's a phrase that's pretty illustrative of just how much impact microbes can have on us. And sort of a big question in this area is how bacteria exactly interface with and communicate with organisms like us or other critters, flora or fauna, and what are the main molecules that are being used as like a molecular language. And it turns out that some of that is RNA. You might be familiar with RNA, DNA, RNA proteins. There are particular RNAs that tend to be small that bacteria actually will send out to their hosts, and this serves sort of as a different language between the two organisms. And it turns out that this bobtail squid I was telling you about is a very nifty and convenient creature to study this dynamic in. And so you have this bioluminescent bacteria called Vibrio fischeri, which you did pronounce correctly earlier, thank you. And then the bobtail squid, this is how big it is. This is sort of what it looks like when it's alive. It's very cute. It's very cute. I'm very fortunate to have collaborators who work with the live squid, and then they do the part that is unsavory, and they will send me the squid parts to do the molecular aspect. My hands are clean. But it's really interesting where the squid has what's called a light organ and sort of inside of their belly, and that's where they keep these bioluminescent bacteria. And so the bacteria provide light that the squid is nocturnal, it goes hunting at night, and basically the light from its symbionts that comes out of its belly will cancel out its moonlit shadows so that prey don't see it coming. And the squid is able to catch tasty things like shrimp or it's basically shrimp. And so I think maybe this is a bit more detailed than I would need. But the bacteria secrete these vesicles that basically bleb off of their membranes, and they're filled with things like RNAs. And then this actually is taken up by the squid cells. And some of these RNAs seem to be really important for this symbiosis, where if you get rid of that, important things like hatchlings developing don't happen, squids die, the bacteria don't stay there, they're just not happy. So it's clearly, these molecules are clearly very important for this partnership between bacteria and squid. And so it turns out that RNAs can have a lot of different weird modifications, extra molecules hanging off of them. And so I have devoted 3 years of my life to figuring out what these modifications are and what they're doing, and hopefully we'll continue doing that for another 3 years before graduating. So fingers crossed. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of science overview. Hopefully that was somewhat interesting. I could read some passages. I think maybe I'll read some of the beginning, and then depending on vibes, pick a few other parts. Okay, so here's the beginning. 1 week ago, I learned that I was a Dropbox baby. In that moment, the first thing I thought of was sea slug mating rituals. When Cephopteran slugs mate, blissful unawareness comes first, followed by the stab. When two sea slugs decide to mate, horny sea slug chemicals coursing through their little sea slug bodies, things take an interesting turn of events. First, they engage in an intimate dance, curled around each other and spinning and swaying in the water. It's invertebrate intrigue. They embrace, wiggling the wing-like ribbons of membrane running down their backs as seductively as sea slugs possibly can. Then the one that decides to act male the quickest will stab an accessory stylet into its partner's head right between the eyes and shoot in a cocktail of mind-controlling chemicals. All is fair in love and war. Much like violent sea slug mating habits, the Dropbox baby news cut through any of my soft illusions real fast. Over the past week, I called the San Oligo Registry of Vital Records, ended up redirected to the US Embassy in South Korea, was bounced to a ward office in Seoul, rerouted back to the embassy, and after a long wait and equally long email chains and deliberations over whether I could better convince the overseas officials to help me if I tried to compose my emails in choppy Korean instead of English, I was given the contact info for a little Presbyterian church in Seoul. The pastor on the other end of the phone told me in a voice gravelly with age and care that he has run the baby drop-off box attached to one wall of the church for many years. I heard children playing and laughing in the background. I was once one of them, he told me, before a couple in America adopted me. He wished me well, told me that he loves all of his Dropbox children near and far, and to please come visit if I am ever in the vicinity. In the distance marked by phone static came the voice of a toddler begging the pastor to play with him, and then our call ended. But I already knew that I was adopted at the end of 4th grade 13 years ago. I'd mailed a tube of my spit, plus secret swabs of my mother's and father's toothbrushes, and that was how I learned that they weren't my mother and father after all. The idea came from reading a book at the library I frequented after school, while waiting for my working parents to pick me up. It was a book on genetics. It talked about DNA and about companies that can peek into the family history written within those loose-lipped strands. I spent the years between then and last week in a self-inflicted purgatory. I didn't go digging any further. At first, I didn't know how, and then once I figured that out, I found that I no longer wanted any more of it. For once in my scientist life, I didn't want to know more. I let things sit, and the longer I did so, the more I became afraid of what I would see once I finally lifted the lid off that fermentation jar. But as myths will tell, restless creatures are not contained inside of jars or boxes or other enclosed spaces for very long. Last week, I read an article that sent me back in time. Scrolling through the news on the morning bus ride to the lab, I came across an article about an adoptee living in Denmark who reunited with her Korean birth parents. She had a little tattoo on her inner left wrist, a cross with 2 dots, and it turned out to be a family tattoo. When she posted a picture of it online, the picture made its way to her birth family and they reunited. I scrolled down the page and stared at the photos of the daughter reuniting with her sister, her parents, the small white dog. Something in me strained at the melange of emotions filling their faces. A small but persistent tug in the heart for something that I don't have but want, something that feels like tachycardia with no physical cause. And so 1 week ago, I called the registry and wound up talking to the Korean pastor who runs the Dropbox into which someone had once placed me. So that is a bit of the intro. So the story in a nutshell is about a Korean-American adoptee who is a scientist studying the origins of life on Earth, the biological origins of life on Earth. And as she's doing science, she makes this odd discovery about her own biology, something within her own cells that ends up being the key to her finding her biological mother. And so there is a bit of science that I hope people found somewhat interesting, semi-inspired by successes and failures in the lab that I have experienced. I think I will read a bit of the passage later in the book. So this is a scene after Abby, the main character, she has discovered the sad thing about her own biology, which I will not say just in case anyone has not read the book. And also this is after something has happened to her best friend and adoptive sister, Iser, which I will also not spoil just in case. And so in this scene, Abby is pretty chin deep in trying to find out what this bizarre biological thing inside of her cells is through science. Sometimes I can't tell the difference between missing Iser, my increased capacity for pattern finding in everything, and general delirium. Perhaps they're one and the same. During fitful insomniac dream sequences, my sleeping self is so resolutely certain that those nonsensical dreamscapes are reality that when I wake up, simply in bed and realizing the fiction of it all, I'm stunned at how I could have been so certain in what lacked any skeletal system of logic. I begin to doubt my waking ability to perceive and to think. I'm often working in the cell culture hood, sucking up my cells with the pipetter as the night falls, although I can't see the sunset nor the moon rise in this windowless room. The wall clock is also broken, so the passage of time is a grand mystery in here. In here, we passage cells against the passage of time. Late night in the lab, I look up from my cells. British Simon is leaning against the door frame, carrying a large cardboard box of pipetter tips. I shrug. All right, he says. He sets down the box along the wall, sending up a cloud of dust and shoulders his packed bag over his coat. Well, watch out for the restless spirits of mastered out PhD students. They still haunt the building, he says. British Simon thinks he's hilarious. He gives me a two-fingered salute and then heads out. The door squeals behind him like a stuffed pig. Nobody has done anything about it for 2 weeks. The dust hangs in the air behind him, and the swirling of the faint speckles reminds me of the swarms of gnats that hover over the wetland in the summer. Reminds me of the times that Isa and I waded through the waters with their mouths and eyes closed. I turn away from the gnat dust. In the silence that follows, I finish my work quickly and I become aware of the low background humming of the hood. The sound kicks up a queasy tightness in my throat as I think about how I used to get annoyed at Isa humming when we studied together in school. Retrospectively, it was such an insignificant inconvenience. My throat curdles. What I wouldn't give to bring her back, to hum and to annoy me one more time. I find that somehow I am laughing as I put my cells into the incubator and the dry sound reverberates in the reflective space. An asthmatic walks into a recursive algorithm. My chest hurts and I am not an asthmatic. When I close the incubator door, I see in the corner of my eye someone outside of the TC room entrance. Back already? I say to Simon as I turn the latch. Simon doesn't say anything. I look over and realize very quickly that it's not Simon. It's a shorter woman. I squint through the gnat dust in the dim light. Why didn't the automatic ceiling lights turn back on when she walked in? I can't make out her facial features and the shadows cast on her form, but she is certainly not a member of the lab, and I don't think I've ever seen her around the building. She's a visitor. The fact that she is wearing sandals is a clear giveaway. Ah, an open-toed plebeian, British Simon would say. Welcome to the lab. Here be dinoflagellates and dragons. But how did she get in here without the infernal squeal of the lab door? And then I think again, how did she get in here at all without keycard access? In a startled moment of lapsed judgment, I say, well, hell, a mastered out spirit, and regret it. I've just committed a probable netherworld faux pas, but she doesn't react. I stare. Her hair is dark and curly and shoulder length like Ether's. And I realize then that I'm hallucinating. I am seeing patterns in the motes of gnat dust hanging in the air. This has to be like the movies. Once the protagonist looks away, the apparition is gone. So I turn my head away, close my eyes, but when I look back, she's still there. Then I cover my eyes with both hands like a fool. And when I lower them, she is still here. What sort of botched peekaboo is this? I can't unsee dust either. She's not moving, just standing and blinking. I scramble for words. Hello? Silence. Can I help you? I don't know what else to try. Welcome to the lab. Can I get you anything? Cheeseburger and medium fries? She says nothing, of course. Then she points at the incubator and shakes her head sadly. I follow the invisible line from her finger. Is something just wrong with my cells? I open the incubator again. They look fine to me, cells being cells, swallowing an expensive pink slurry. I just need to sleep. Should probably kick it up a notch to temazepam tonight. Milkshake, I say weakly. And when I look back, she is finally gone. I walk out into the aisle and look around. I wave my hand in the air and the gnat-like dust motes swirl lazily. The ceiling lights flick on. Some people see Jesus in their breakfast toast. Others see their gone best friend in dusty lab air. Here is the reason why a swarm of gnats is called a ghost. And then so the book I wrote so that it would be passages that are about Abby, and then those are interspersed with snippets that are from her sort of journal entries that are more like diary entries. And I think this one, I am realizing now that this has a lot to do with my current PhD work, so I don't know if writing this manifested my PhD, but here goes. Genes like these live a nomadic lifestyle. These are bits of DNA or RNA that spring up, and away from their original genetic hometowns. Sometimes they end up just down the genetic road, other times in an entirely foreign cell. Mobile genetic elements are a rowdy, fidgety, lawless bunch. They never quite know where they belong. Like us, Easer, you, an immigrant, and I, an adoptee, are not unlike mobile genetic elements. All three of us never quite fit in any one place, or perhaps we feel like we could exist in too many places. Where we do belong, it seems, is in flux. Maybe I can do one more passage from a bit later in the story. And so the main character, Abby, she ends up going on sort of a quest to find her birth mother, and part of that involves visiting her family in Korea towards the end of the story. So here is a passage where she is reuniting with her family that she has not seen for a while. When I find that the elephant-shaped wall clock above the kitchen alcove reads 1 in the morning, still sleepless, I push aside my blankets and wander back to the hallway lined with pictures. There's a microscope I drew when I first learned how to use one in middle school science class, except here a stick figure Yoon family is sitting together on the slide underneath the objective. Oma in her floral kitchen apron, Appa and his curly gray hair, Hajun in his wheelchair modified with a book stand, Iser and her broad smile, and me with my arms spread in the air as though asking for a hug or perhaps offering a hug. Drawing Iser's smiling mouth is closer to her chin than in real life, but then I wonder if this is what Iser would have looked like as a 60-year-old. By then, would her aging skin have slipped just a bit down her face to fit drawing Iser's geometry? As a 70-year-old, crow's feet, ravines, skin growing thinner and looser like the spring fabric of her room's curtains, maybe. An 80-year-old, cheeks sinking inwards and lips thinning like a receding tide. She would have lived to be at least 100, because she always ate tteokguk on New Year's and miyeokguk on birthdays. They promote longevity, she'd say to me when I shrug it off myself. Come on, you're not going to live to be 100 at this rate. I'll outlive you. You just watch me. And here I stand watching drawing Iser's static agelessness. A door creaks open down the hallway, startling me. When Hajun emerges from his room, unaware of my presence in the hallway, I'm surprised again at the sight of him out of bed and walking on his own. Look who's still up, Night Owl? Oh, Jesus, he looks alarmed when he sees me. He scares me. His arms are hidden behind his back. Why the guilty look, I ask. Hajun glances in the direction of Oma and Appa's bedroom. The door is still closed and quiet before stepping out carrying something round in his arms. One of Appa's old film reels, he says, showing me, and I stare at the bronze reel like it's a revived corpse. I hid one before he threw them all out before we moved. He waves a hand in the direction of the kitchen. I spilled some hot chocolate on it, so I'm gonna go wash it off. But why aren't you asleep? I tell him it's not nightmares this time. Really? No ocean, no mirrors? I shake my head and Hajun considers this. You know, it only takes 2 mirrors to make a labyrinth. I give him a funny look. When did the little mister get so wise? Who says I wasn't wise before? He sticks his tongue out, wise enough to quote Borges in my English essay just a second ago. The dude had nightmares about mirrors too. He moves on to the kitchen and I hear the tap turn on. There is something that's warmed in me knowing that one of Appa's film reels is cared for by Hajun, a kind of prophetic tingle, the same electric warmth shared by my microscope drawing hanging on the wall. I squint at the piece of tape paper again, at the knobs and screws I was so careful to draw, at all 5 little people sitting together on the glass slide, stick figure smiles, unaware of the passage of time. A microscope, such as the confocal microscope that I use to discover in my cells, depends on 2 or 3 internal mirrors. And what a labyrinth that has led to, I think. I breathe slowly to feel that warmth fill my lungs. I have thought often again in recent months, is it good to learn or dream of another world you want desperately if you cannot have it? If I cannot have a world in which everyone lives on, if I cannot have a world in which Hajun is completely cured, if I cannot have a world in which my history is not spliced together from so many disparate, disorienting pieces. Perhaps dreams are like salt on the soul if the soul were a tongue tasting all the world has to offer. I cannot live without them, existence would be bland without them, but they will desiccate me if I dwell too long. When I first looked at my cells within cells through a microscope, those few surreal months ago, I was reminded that there are worlds within worlds too. If I just know to look, I think. Even in this one home world I have, this one home, there is an infinity of fractal worlds unfolding within. I think I will stop there.
How about another round of applause?